What happens when the person you trust most in the world betrays you at your most vulnerable? For Nora, 8 months pregnant and standing in a crowded airport, that nightmare became a horrifying reality. The man who had vowed to protect her, her husband Marcus, shoved her to the cold, hard floor in front of hundreds of strangers, choosing his mistress over his wife and unborn child. But destiny had a shocking twist in store. As a torrential storm raged outside, a mysterious stranger stepped out of the chaos. He was Julian Vance, a reclusive tech billionaire, and he was about to make a decision that would change all their lives forever. The air in the departures hall of JFK International Airport was thick with the electric hum of 1,000 journeys beginning and ending. For Nora Hayes, it felt like the end of something she couldn't quite name. At 8 months pregnant, every step was a conscious effort, a delicate balancing act of her own weight and the precious life she carried within her. Her hand rested instinctively on the swell of her belly, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. The baby, a boy they had decided to name Leo, was a lively passenger, and his gentle kicks were a constant, reassuring presence. Her husband, Marcus Sterling, strode a few feet ahead of her, his custom-tailored suit a stark contrast to the casual travel attire of those around them. He dragged his designer suitcase with an impatient rhythm, the wheels clicking sharply against the polished floor. He hadn't looked back at her once since they'd gotten out of the car. "Marcus, could you slow down a little?" Nora called out, her voice slightly breathless. He stopped abruptly, turning with a sigh that was pure performance. His face, usually so handsome it could stop traffic, was pinched with an ugly annoyance. "Nora, the flight isn't going to wait for us. We're already cutting it fine because you couldn't find your comfortable shoes." The accusation stung. She had been ready for 20 minutes, waiting by the door while he took a critical business call, his voice low and secretive. "I was ready on time," she said softly, not wanting to cause a scene. "We can just walk together." Marcus scoffed, a muscle feathering in his jaw. "Just keep up." Their baby moon to the Caribbean was supposed to be a final, romantic getaway, before their lives were irrevocably changed by parenthood. It was Marcus's idea, a sudden, grand gesture that had surprised Nora. In recent months, he had grown distant, his evenings spent at the office, and his phone perpetually angled away from her. She had hoped this trip was his way of reconnecting, of showing her that he was still the man she had fallen in love with, the charming, ambitious founder of Sterling Price Holdings who had swept her off her feet. But as they approached the first-class check-in counter, Nora's hope began to curdle into a cold dread. Standing there, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against a crimson suitcase that matched her lipstick, was Chloe. She was Marcus's executive assistant, a woman who was too beautiful, too familiar, and too smugly possessive whenever Nora visited the office. Nora's steps faltered. "Marcus, what is she doing here?" Chloe's eyes met hers, a flicker of triumphant cruelty in their depths. Marcus didn't even look at his wife. He walked straight to Chloe's side, his hand landing on the small of her back. "Change of plans, Nora." The world seemed to slow down. The hum of the airport faded into a dull roar in Nora's ears. "What do you mean, change of plans?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Chloe's coming with us." "Well," he corrected himself, a smirk playing on his lips, "she's coming with me. You're not." He slid a thin folder from his briefcase and thrust it at her. It wasn't a ticket. It was a sheaf of legal documents, the top page bearing the bolded words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Nora stared at it, her mind refusing to process the letters. "Divorce? Marcus, what is this?" "I'm pregnant with your son." "Allegedly my son," he sneered, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "And frankly, I'm not interested in finding out. You were a means to an end, Nora. Your family's name opened doors for me. Now, those doors are open, and you've become a liability. A pregnant, sentimental liability." Chloe giggled, a sound like shattering glass. "He needs a partner, Nora, not a project." Tears welled in Nora's eyes, hot and shameful. She looked from her husband's cold face to his mistress's mocking one. The carefully constructed reality of her life was disintegrating in the middle of an airport terminal. "You can't do this," she whispered, her hand clutching the divorce papers. "We built a life together. Our baby." "Sign the papers," Marcus commanded, his voice hardening. "There's a generous settlement in there, contingent on you not making a fuss. Disappear quietly, and you'll be comfortable. Fight me, and I will ruin you. I will prove you're an unfit mother and take that child." The threat hung in the air, sucking the breath from her lungs. He would do it. He had the money, the connections, and the sheer ruthlessness to do it. Desperation clawed at her throat. She took a step toward him, her hand outstretched. "Marcus, please, don't do this to us, to Leo." It was the wrong move. Her plea for connection was met with a wall of revulsion. "Get away from me!" he snarled, and with a sudden, violent motion, he shoved her. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a forceful, angry thrust aimed at her chest. The unexpected force sent her stumbling backward. Her center of gravity, already compromised by her pregnancy, gave way completely. For a terrifying, suspended moment, she was airborne. And then she was falling. She hit the ground hard, the impact jarring through her entire body. A collective gasp rose from the crowd around them. Pain, sharp and immediate, shot through her hip and wrist, but a far greater, colder terror seized her as she felt a sickening cramp seize her abdomen. She cried out, her hands flying to her belly, her mind screaming Leo's name. From her place on the floor, she looked up. Marcus and Chloe were already turning away, handing their passports to the check-in agent, as if nothing had happened. They stepped past the velvet rope, disappearing into the priority lane, leaving her discarded on the cold, unforgiving floor of the terminal like a piece of forgotten luggage. The crowd of strangers just stared, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and a hesitance to get involved. No one moved to help. She was utterly and completely alone. The world was a kaleidoscope of blurred faces and echoing murmurs. Nora lay on the floor, the cold of the marble seeping through her coat, a stark contrast to the fire of pain and humiliation burning within her. The sharp cramp in her belly intensified, a terrifying premonition that stole her breath. Her baby. Her son. Was he okay? The thought was a primal scream in her mind, overriding everything else. She tried to push herself up, but a fresh wave of pain from her wrist made her cry out and collapse back. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the dust on the floor. She saw airport security moving toward her, their expressions a mixture of concern and procedural annoyance. Marcus and Chloe were gone. They had stepped through security and vanished, leaving her to deal with the wreckage they had created. Suddenly, the ambient light of the terminal flickered. A deep, resonant boom of thunder rattled the vast windows, and the sky outside, which had been merely overcast, was ripped open. Rain began to lash against the glass, driven by a wind that howled like a wounded animal. A storm of biblical proportions had descended upon New York City. On the departure boards, the green "on time" notices began to flip to yellow "delayed," then to a cascade of red "cancelled." It was in this chaotic moment, as the heavens seemed to weep for her, that a figure knelt beside her. She had been so consumed by her own agony that she hadn't noticed his approach. "Ma'am, are you all right? Don't try to move." The voice was calm, deep and steady, an anchor in her swirling vortex of panic. Nora looked up through her tear-filled eyes. The man was dressed in a simple dark sweater and jeans, a stark departure from Marcus's flashy suits. He had kind eyes, the color of warm whiskey, etched with genuine concern. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed a strong jaw. He wasn't handsome in the polished, predatory way Marcus was. His was a face of quiet strength and intelligence. He had already flagged down a security guard. "We need a paramedic now," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He then turned his attention back to Nora. "My name is Julian. I saw what happened. I'm so sorry." His apology, offered on behalf of a world that had just stood by and watched, was so sincere it broke through a fresh wall of her grief. A sob escaped her lips. "My baby," she choked out, her hand protectively cradling her stomach. I think something's wrong." "Help is on the way," he reassured her, his presence a strange bubble of calm amidst the airport's growing storm-induced pandemonium. He didn't touch her, but he leaned in, creating a sense of privacy, shielding her from the curious stares of the onlookers. "What's your name?" "Nora," she whispered. "Nora," he repeated softly, as if testing the sound of it. "We're going to get you and your baby checked out. Everything will be okay." The paramedics arrived, their efficiency a welcome balm. As they began their assessment, asking questions about the pain and her pregnancy, Julian remained nearby, a silent guardian. He provided a witness statement to the airport police, his voice low but firm, clearly detailing the assault he had witnessed. He used words like unprovoked, cowardly, and deliberate. He gave them Marcus's name, which he'd overheard during the confrontation. Nora was carefully lifted onto a gurney. As they wheeled her toward an exit, she saw the full chaos the storm had unleashed. The airport was a sea of stranded passengers. All flights were grounded indefinitely. A bitter irony washed over her. Marcus wasn't going to the Caribbean after all. He was trapped here, just like her. At the hospital, the emergency room was a whirlwind of activity. Nora was terrified, convinced the fall had harmed her baby. But after a tense hour and an ultrasound, a kind-faced doctor named Anya Sharma delivered the news. "You have a sprained wrist and some severe bruising on your hip, but you are very lucky," Dr. Sharma said, her voice gentle. "The baby is fine. His heartbeat is strong. The cramping was likely due to the stress and the impact of the fall, a condition called Braxton Hicks contractions. But we want to keep you overnight for observation, just to be safe." Relief washed over Nora so powerfully it left her weak. Leo was okay. Her son was a fighter. The tears that came now were not of despair, but of profound gratitude. She was moved to a quiet room in the maternity ward. As she lay in the sterile bed, the reality of her situation came crashing back down. She was alone, injured, and about to be divorced. Her husband had abandoned her in the most brutal way imaginable. She had no home to go to. The penthouse apartment was in Marcus's name. Her family was in California, and she was too ashamed to call them, to admit that the perfect life she'd curated on social media was a lie. Just as she was sinking into a fresh wave of hopelessness, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Julian. He was holding a small bag. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his voice quiet. "The nurse at the front desk told me which room you were in. I thought you might need some things." He placed the bag on the bedside table. Inside was a bottle of water, a gentle, unscented lotion, a soft pair of socks, and a phone charger. It was a collection of simple, thoughtful items that no one but a person who had spent time in a hospital would think of. "How did you—" she began, stunned by his kindness. "I guessed," he said with a small, hesitant smile. "I also took the liberty of speaking with the hospital's administration. Your bill is taken care of." Nora stared at him. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Julian looked out the window at the rain still beating against the glass. "Let's just say I know what it feels like to be blindsided, to have the floor fall out from under you. No one should have to go through that alone." He met her gaze again, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of a deep, old pain in his eyes. "Especially not when you're responsible for bringing a new life into the world. Get some rest, Nora. You're safe now." He turned to leave, but Nora found her voice. "Julian, wait." He paused at the door. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "Truly. Thank you." He simply nodded, gave her one last, reassuring smile, and was gone, leaving Nora alone with a phone charger, a bottle of water, and the startling realization that in the midst of the worst day of her life, she had encountered the profound and unexpected kindness of a stranger. The hospital discharged Nora the following afternoon. The storm had passed, leaving behind a city washed clean, glistening under a pale, watery sun. But for Nora, the internal tempest was still raging. The observation had confirmed that Leo was unharmed, a small miracle for which she was endlessly grateful. Her wrist was wrapped in a brace, and a deep purple bruise was blooming on her hip, a painful souvenir of Marcus's cruelty. The hospital's social worker had given her pamphlets for shelters and legal aid, well-meaning but terrifying prospects. As she stood in the hospital lobby, clutching a small plastic bag with her belongings, the full weight of her homelessness pressed down on her. She had a credit card, but Marcus was notoriously vindictive. He had likely already frozen their joint accounts. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Nora, I hope you are feeling better. I have a car waiting for you at the main entrance. Please allow me to help you sort things out." Julian. She hesitated for only a moment. The alternative was a taxi to a future so uncertain it made her stomach clench with fear. She trusted the quiet kindness in his eyes more than she trusted anything else in the world right now. She typed a simple, "Okay," and walked out the automatic doors. A sleek, black car was waiting, a driver holding a sign with her name. He opened the door for her, and she sank into the plush leather seats. They drove in silence, leaving the city behind and heading north along the Hudson River. The scenery shifted from concrete towers to the lush autumnal golds and reds of sprawling estates. They finally turned into a long, private driveway, hidden by a grove of ancient oak trees, and pulled up before a stunning house made of glass, steel, and dark wood. It was less a house and more a work of art, perched on a cliff overlooking the river. Julian was waiting for her at the door. He was dressed as casually as before, and his presence was immediately calming. "Welcome," he said simply. "I thought you might appreciate some privacy over a hotel." The inside of the house was minimalist, but warm, with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the space in natural light. A fire crackled in a large stone fireplace. It was the most beautiful and peaceful place Nora had ever seen. "This is your home?" she asked, awestruck. "It is," he confirmed. "Please make yourself comfortable. There's a guest suite downstairs with its own entrance. It's completely private. You can stay as long as you need." Over the next few days, Julian gave Nora what she needed most: space. He was present, but never intrusive. He would make coffee in the morning, leave a tray of food outside her door if she didn't emerge, and sit by the fire in the evenings, reading. They began to talk, tentatively at first, and then with a growing ease. Nora found herself telling him things she had never admitted to anyone, not even herself. She spoke of her whirlwind romance with Marcus, how his ambition and confidence had dazzled her. She confessed how, over the past few years, his charm had curdled into control, his confidence into arrogance. He had slowly isolated her from her friends, criticized her career choices until she gave up her job as a gallery curator, and made her feel entirely dependent on him. The pregnancy, which should have been a joyous occasion, had been the final straw. It was an unwelcome complication in the perfect, high-powered life he was building for himself. Julian listened without judgment. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. He simply listened, his quiet attention a form of validation she hadn't realized she was starving for. One evening, as they sat by the fire, watching the river flow below, she asked him about the sadness she sometimes saw in his eyes. He was quiet for a long moment. "I founded a tech company, Vance Innovations, with my wife, Lena," he began, his voice soft. "She was the brilliant one, the visionary. I was just the coder who could keep up with her. We built it from our garage into what it is today." He paused, his gaze distant. 3 years ago, we were in a car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. I walked away with a few broken bones. Lena, she didn't. Nora's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry, Julian. It's why I stepped back from the company," he continued. "Why I live out here. The world kept moving, but mine had stopped. I see a lot of her in you, you know. Not in looks, but in spirit. I saw it at the airport. Even after what he did to you, there was this fire in your eyes, a survivor's fire. Lena had that. His confession created a new, deeper bond between them. They were two people whose lives had been shattered by unforeseen tragedies. They understood each other's pain in a way no one else could. Julian began to gently encourage her to think about the future. "You need a good lawyer, Nora," he said one morning. "Someone who will fight for you and your son. I know a person. Her name is Isabella Rossi. She's the best." He also arranged for a private obstetrician to come to the house to check on her, sparing her the stress of another hospital visit. He filled the kitchen with healthy food and prenatal vitamins. He was quietly, methodically, building a fortress of care and support around her. Nora started to feel a flicker of strength return. The constant fear that had been her companion for months began to recede. In the quiet sanctuary of Julian's home, sheltered from the storm of her old life, she began to heal. She started sketching again, an old passion she had abandoned at Marcus's subtle insistence. She took walks by the river, breathing in the crisp air, feeling the life inside her move and grow. She was not just a victim anymore. She was a mother-to-be, and she would be damned if she let Marcus Sterling destroy her or her son's future. With Julian's quiet support as her foundation, Nora was ready to fight back. While Nora was finding sanctuary, Marcus Sterling was trapped in a 5-star hotel suite, fuming. The storm had grounded all private and commercial flights out of New York for 2 days. His romantic escape to St. Bart's with Chloe had turned into a claustrophobic nightmare of room service and simmering resentment. "I can't believe this," he raged, pacing the length of the suite. 2 days. Wasted. Do you know how much this trip cost? Chloe, lounging on the bed, scrolling through her phone, barely looked up. "Relax, babe. We'll get there. Think of it as a pre-vacation." Her casual indifference grated on his nerves. The incident at the airport was replaying in his mind, not with guilt, but with irritation at its messiness. The public display, the gasps of the crowd. It was all so common. He had intended for Nora to simply take the papers and slink away, defeated. Her defiant plea had forced his hand. "This is her fault," he muttered, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "She's always so dramatic. Had to make a scene." "So what are you going to do about her?" Chloe asked, a slight edge to her voice. "She's not just going to disappear." "Of course she will," Marcus said with absolute certainty. "I've already had my bank freeze all our joint accounts and credit cards. She has nothing. No job, no money, no connections without me. She'll sign the papers. The settlement is more than generous for a woman in her position." His phone rang. It was his lawyer, a slick corporate shark named Peterson. "Marcus, we have a problem," Peterson said, his voice strained. "The airport police have filed a report. Assault. Several witnesses, including one very credible one who stayed with her until the paramedics arrived. And it gets worse. Nora has retained counsel." Marcus laughed. "Legal aid? Who is she going to get? Some ambulance chaser?" "No, Marcus," Peterson said slowly. "She's retained Isabella Rossi." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Isabella Rossi wasn't just a lawyer. She was a legend. A tenacious, brilliant litigator who specialized in high-asset divorces and corporate malfeasance. She was famously selective about her clients and prohibitively expensive. There was no conceivable way Nora could afford her. "That's impossible," Marcus stammered. "Where would she get that kind of money?" "I don't know, but a letter of representation arrived at my office an hour ago. They're rejecting your initial settlement offer. They're demanding full financial disclosure, and they've filed a motion for emergency spousal and child support. They're also requesting a restraining order, citing the assault at the airport." The whiskey suddenly tasted sour. This was not going according to plan. This was a declaration of war. His first move was to try and control Nora directly. He called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He sent a barrage of texts, alternating between threats and hollow promises. "Nora, don't be a fool. Call off your attack dog. You don't know what you're getting into. Think about the baby. Do you want him born into a war zone? Sign the papers and we can all move on. I miss you. Maybe I was too hasty. Let's talk." When she didn't respond, his fury mounted. He hired a private investigator to find her. "She's pregnant and emotional," he told the PI. "She's probably hiding out at some cheap motel. Find her. I need to know who she's talking to." Days later, the investigator came back with a report that made Marcus's blood run cold. Nora wasn't in a motel. She was residing at a private estate in Westchester County, an estate that was famously unapproachable, protected by state-of-the-art security, an estate that belonged to the reclusive, widowed tech billionaire Julian Vance. "Vance?" Marcus repeated, stunned. "The founder of Vance Innovations? What the hell is she doing with him?" The PI shrugged. "He was at the airport, sir. My sources say he was the witness who stayed with her. He's the one paying for Isabella Rossi." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Julian Vance, a man whose net worth made Marcus's fortune look like pocket change. A man with infinite resources and a reputation for quiet, unshakable integrity. Nora hadn't just found a lawyer, she'd found a patron, a protector. The arrogance that had defined Marcus's life began to crack, revealing the panic beneath. This wasn't a simple divorce anymore. This was a battle against an opponent he couldn't bully, buy, or intimidate. He tried a different tactic. He launched a smear campaign, leaking stories to gossip columns through his PR team. He painted Nora as an unstable gold digger, suggesting her pregnancy was of questionable paternity, and that she had immediately latched onto a wealthier man. He portrayed himself as the heartbroken husband, forced to end his marriage due to his wife's erratic behavior. He believed he could still control the narrative. He believed his money and power made him invincible. He underestimated Nora's resilience. He underestimated Isabella Rossi's tenacity. And most of all, he underestimated the quiet, determined man who had decided to shelter his pregnant wife from the storm. Marcus Sterling was a man who had never faced real consequences, and in his arrogance, he couldn't see that he wasn't just facing a divorce, he was facing a reckoning. The letter from Isabella Rossi's office was a work of art in legal intimidation. It was delivered to Marcus's lawyer, and its contents sent a shockwave through his carefully constructed world. The rejection of his settlement was absolute. The counteroffer was staggering, demanding not just half of their shared assets, but a forensic accounting of Sterling Price holdings, suggesting Marcus had been hiding funds. It also demanded he cover 100% of Nora's prenatal care, childbirth expenses, and a substantial monthly sum for child support, retroactively. Attached was a draft of the restraining order application, complete with a dozen sworn witness statements from the airport, including a chillingly precise one from Julian Vance. In the peaceful quiet of Julian's home, Nora read a copy of the letter, her hand trembling slightly. It was so bold, so aggressive. It was everything she wasn't. "Is this too much?" she asked, looking at Julian and Isabella, who had come to the house for a strategy meeting. Isabella Rossi was a formidable woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that radiated competence. She took a sip of her tea. "Nora, in cases like this, too much is the starting point. Marcus is a bully. Bullies only understand overwhelming force. He expected you to roll over. We are showing him that you are not a victim. You are a plaintiff, and you have resources." "My resources," Julian added quietly from his armchair by the fire, "and I assure you they are considerable." The alliance between the three of them was unlikely but powerful. Nora, with her intimate knowledge of Marcus's character and habits. Isabella, with her brilliant legal mind and decades of experience dismantling men like Marcus. And Julian, with his near-limitless funds and, more importantly, his technological expertise. "He's going to lie," Nora said, her voice stronger than it had been a week ago. "He'll hide money. He has offshore accounts, shell corporations. He used to brag about being untouchable." Isabella smiled grimly. "Everyone thinks they're untouchable until they're not. We just need a thread to pull on." That's when Julian leaned forward. "Perhaps I can help with that." He looked at Nora. "You mentioned he was always on a second phone. One you didn't recognize?" Nora nodded. "Yes, a burner phone, he called it. He was always taking calls in his study with the door locked." "And his company, Sterling Price," Julian continued, turning to Isabella. "Its growth has been explosive, almost unnaturally so. What do you know about his partner, Jonathan Price?" "Price is old money," Isabella replied. "He provided the initial capital and the name recognition. Marcus is the operator, the deal maker." "Exactly," Julian said. "Price provides the legitimacy. Marcus provides the growth. I have a team in my venture capital division. They are experts at due diligence, at finding financial irregularities that others miss. They can perform a deep dive into Sterling Price's public filings and investment patterns. Legally, of course, all from publicly available information." He then looked back at Nora. "This might be difficult, but I need you to think. Any names you overheard? Any scraps of paper you might have seen? Anything at all that seemed out of place in his study?" Nora closed her eyes, forcing herself back into the cold, sterile environment of the penthouse she had once called home. She remembered dusting Marcus's desk one afternoon, a task the housekeeper usually did. She had picked up a leather-bound notebook. Inside, he had been practicing a signature over and over. But it wasn't his. It was Jonathan Price's. At the time, she thought it was odd, but dismissed it. She also remembered a name he'd muttered in his sleep once, in a cold sweat. Silas. When she relayed this information, Isabella and Julian exchanged a look. Practicing a signature could imply forgery, Isabella said, her voice taut with excitement. And Silas could be a name, Julian added, or a code. Let my team work on it. As the legal battle lines were drawn, a new, unforeseen complication arose. Marcus's PR campaign began to gain traction. Tabloid articles appeared online with headlines like "Billionaire's pregnant wife abandons marriage for richer man," and "Inside the Sterling divorce, a tale of greed and betrayal." They used old photos of Nora at parties, making her look frivolous and materialistic. The stories were deeply hurtful, painting her as the villain. She was secluded in Julian's house, but the world outside was judging her. One evening, a paparazzo with a long lens camera managed to get a shot of her and Julian walking on the property's riverbank. The next day, the photo was everywhere, under the headline, "The Grieving Widow and the Runaway Wife, a $1 billion affair." Nora was devastated. "They're making it look like I'm... Like where?" Julian's expression was grim. "This is how he fights, Nora. Not in a courtroom, but in the gutter. He's trying to discredit you as a witness and as a mother." He paused, his gaze meeting hers, filled with a protective fire. "We can't let him control the story." He picked up his phone and made a call. "Get me Sarah Jennings at the New York Times," he said to his assistant. "The Sarah Jennings. Tell her I'm ready to give my first interview in 3 years." It was a bold move. Julian was famously private, having shunned all media since his wife's death. His re-emergence would be a major news event. A few days later, a renowned journalist arrived at the house. The interview took place in the living room. Julian didn't speak of his company or technology. He spoke about witnessing a pregnant woman being assaulted by her husband. He described her courage and dignity in the face of unimaginable cruelty. He never used the word affair, but he framed their relationship as one of profound human connection born from tragedy. "I'm helping a friend," he stated, his words carefully chosen. "A woman of incredible strength who was left with nothing by a man who should have been her protector. I am ensuring that she and her child have the safety and the resources to see that justice is done. If Marcus Sterling has a problem with that, he can take it up with me." The article that followed was a bombshell. It completely neutralized Marcus's smear campaign, reframing Nora as a survivor and Julian as her noble protector. It also put Marcus Sterling directly in the crosshairs of a man far more powerful and respected than he could ever hope to be. The battle was no longer just about a divorce. It was about 2 powerful men, a woman's future, and the truth. And the alliance, forged in a storm, was ready for war. The New York Times article changed the landscape of the conflict. Public opinion, swayed by Julian's sterling reputation, swung decisively in Nora's favor. Marcus, who thrived on admiration and public perception, found himself cast as a villain. Business associates grew cool. Invitations to society events dried up. Chloe, who had reveled in the idea of becoming the new Mrs. Sterling, began to complain about the negative press and the whispers that followed them everywhere. Marcus, however, was not a man who retreated. He doubled down. He instructed his lawyer to file countersuits, accusing Nora of defamation and Julian of tortious interference. It was a desperate, aggressive legal strategy designed to intimidate and exhaust them with paperwork and legal fees. But he was playing checkers against chess masters. Isabella Rossi met every motion with a calm, surgical response, while Julian's financial backing meant the war of attrition Marcus was counting on would never work. Meanwhile, Julian's due diligence team, operating with the quiet efficiency of a special forces unit, began to find the threads Isabella needed. They analyzed years of Sterling Price's financial reports, cross-referencing them with global market data. They discovered a pattern. Just before a major corporate acquisition, a series of seemingly unrelated smaller companies would engage in frenzied trading of the target company's stock. These smaller companies were all registered offshore, their ownership hidden behind layers of corporate veils. But the profits they made were astronomical. It was a classic insider trading scheme, executed with sophisticated precision. Marcus isn't just a corporate raider, Julian explained to Nora and Isabella, pointing to a complex chart on a large monitor. He's using confidential information from his partner's network to set up trades before a deal is announced. He's making a fortune on the side, and it's completely illegal. The final piece of the puzzle was the name Nora had remembered: Silas. Julian's team ran the name through every database they had. It wasn't a person. It was an acronym: Sterling Investment Logistics and Acquisition Systems. It was the name of a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, the primary vehicle for the illicit trades. Now we need proof linking Marcus directly to Silas, Isabella said, her eyes gleaming. Bank transfers, signed documents, anything. The key, they realized, was the burner phone. A phone like that would be used for untraceable communication, for giving the orders that couldn't be sent over official channels. How do we get to it? Nora asked. We set a trap, Julian said, a plan forming in his mind. Their opportunity came in the form of a court-mandated deposition. Marcus would have to answer questions under oath. Isabella's strategy was to needle him, to agitate him about his finances until he became flustered. The day of the deposition, Nora was a bundle of nerves. It would be the first time she would see Marcus since the airport. Julian drove her to Isabella's downtown office building. You are not the same woman he pushed to the floor, Nora, he told her, his hand briefly covering hers. Remember that. You are strong. He's the one who is afraid. Marcus arrived with his lawyer, oozing a false confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. He pointedly ignored Nora, directing a venomous glare at Julian, who sat in the room as an observer. For hours, Isabella questioned Marcus about his lifestyle, his spending, and the discrepancies between his declared income and his lavish expenditures. He was smug and evasive, sticking to his prepared script. Then Isabella changed tack. Mr. Sterling, let's talk about Silas. A flicker of panic crossed Marcus's face, so quick that only someone looking for it would have seen it. I don't know what you're talking about. Silas, Isabella repeated calmly. An entity based in the Caymans. It has made remarkably prescient investments in companies that Sterling Price later acquired. Are you familiar with it? No, Marcus snapped, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. Isabella leaned forward. That's a shame, because we have reason to believe the owner of Silas is about to be investigated by the SEC. Insider trading carries a hefty prison sentence. This was the bait. They had no proof that an investigation was imminent, but the suggestion was enough. They were banking on Marcus's paranoia. After the deposition, Marcus was visibly shaken. As he and his lawyer walked through the lobby of the building, a woman, elegantly dressed, accidentally bumped into him, spilling the contents of her purse. As Marcus irritably helped her pick up her things, a man in a technician's uniform discreetly swapped the SIM card in the coat he had draped over his arm. The entire exchange took less than 10 seconds. Both the woman and the technician were private operatives hired by Julian. They now had a clone of Marcus's burner phone SIM card. That night, Julian's team worked feverishly. They downloaded encrypted messages, call logs, and voice notes. And there it was, the smoking gun. Dozens of messages to an offshore banker giving explicit instructions for the Silas trades. Voice notes outlining strategies to deceive his partner, Jonathan Price. And most damningly, a scanned copy of a loan agreement with a notoriously shady financier where Marcus had forged Jonathan Price's signature as a guarantor. They had him. It was more than just a divorce case now. This was a federal crime. But as they compiled the evidence, they found something else. A series of texts between Marcus and Chloe, sent just minutes after he had pushed Nora at the airport. Chloe: "Did you handle it? Is she gone?" Marcus: "Handled. The cow made a scene, so I put her in her place, on her way back to obscurity." Chloe: "Good. Now we can finally have our life. Just us." Marcus: "Just us. I'm transferring the initial funds to your account now. The first of many." Reading the cold, cruel words, Nora felt not pain, but a clarifying rage. Chloe wasn't just a passive mistress. She was an active co-conspirator. She knew about the divorce, about the plan to abandon a pregnant woman, and she was being paid for her role in it. "She's complicit," Nora said, her voice hard as steel. "She needs to go down with him." The final confrontation was not set in a courtroom, but in the sterile, wood-paneled boardroom of Sterling Price Holdings. Isabella Rossi, armed with irrefutable evidence, had made a strategic call. Instead of going directly to the authorities, she had requested a meeting with Jonathan Price and his legal team, presenting them with the option to clean their own house before the federal government burned it down. Price, a patrician man in his late 60s whose reputation was everything to him, had been horrified by the preliminary evidence. He agreed to the meeting immediately. Marcus and Chloe were summoned under the guise of an emergency board meeting. They walked in arm, projecting an image of a united power couple, ready to take over the world. Their smiles froze when they saw who was already seated at the long mahogany table. Jonathan Price, flanked by two severe-looking lawyers. Isabella Rossi, looking like a poised hawk. Julian Vance, his presence a silent, immovable mountain. And Nora. Nora sat tall, her hands resting on her pregnant belly, which was now impossible to hide. She met Marcus's shocked and furious gaze with a calm, steady stare. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus blustered, gesturing at Nora and Julian. "This is a private company matter. They have no place here." "On the contrary, Marcus," Jonathan Price said, his voice laced with ice. "They are the reason we are here. And you are about to listen." For the next hour, Isabella Rossi systematically dismantled Marcus Sterling's life. She presented printouts of the encrypted text messages from the burner phone. She played the voice notes where Marcus bragged about his insider trading schemes. She projected the forged loan document onto the large screen at the end of the room, showing a forensic analysis that proved the signature was not Jonathan Price's. The color drained from Marcus's face. He sputtered denials, but the evidence was overwhelming. Then, Isabella turned her attention to Chloe. She displayed the bank statements, showing the large sums of money Marcus had transferred to her account, starting on the day of the airport incident. "Miss Dubois," Isabella said coolly, "these payments, coinciding with your lover's plot to abandon his pregnant wife, look a great deal like conspiracy and unjust enrichment. You are an accessory to his crimes." Chloe, who had been watching with growing horror, turned on Marcus. "You told me this was all legal! You told me it was your money!" "Shut up, you idiot!" Marcus hissed at her. "Don't you dare speak to her that way," Jonathan Price thundered, rising from his seat. "You have used my name, forged my signature, and exposed my company to catastrophic legal and financial ruin. You are a parasite, Marcus." It was then that Julian Vance spoke for the first time, his voice low and cutting. "You're not just a criminal, Sterling. You're a coward. I saw what you did to your wife. A man who would intentionally harm a pregnant woman, the mother of his child, deserves whatever is coming to him." Cornered and exposed, Marcus did the only thing he knew how to do. He attacked Nora. "This is your fault," he screamed, his face contorted with rage. "You and your billionaire boyfriend. You couldn't just walk away with the money I offered you. You had to destroy me." Nora finally spoke, her voice clear and strong, ringing with the authority of someone who had survived the fire. "You offered me money to disappear, Marcus, to pretend your son didn't exist. But he does exist, and I am his mother. I didn't do this to destroy you. I did this to protect him. I did this so he would never have to be ashamed of where he came from, and so he would never, ever learn how to be a man from you." Her words hung in the air, a final, devastating indictment. The fallout was swift and brutal. Jonathan Price immediately voted to dissolve their partnership and strip Marcus of his title and shares, launching a civil suit to reclaim the embezzled funds. Faced with the mountain of evidence, he also made the obligatory call to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Chloe, seeing her future of luxury and status evaporate, made a deal. In exchange for immunity, she agreed to testify against Marcus, handing over every piece of information she had. She gave back the money, emerging with nothing but a tarnished reputation. Marcus Sterling was arrested the next day. The man who had stood at the pinnacle of New York finance was led away in handcuffs, his tailored suit rumpled, his face a mask of disbelief. The press, which he had once so masterfully manipulated, captured his downfall in humiliating detail. The charges were extensive: insider trading, wire fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. The assault charge from the airport was the grim cherry on top. Nora watched the news report from the quiet safety of Julian's living room. There was no joy, no triumphant gloating. There was only a profound sense of closure. The storm had finally passed, and she had not only survived, but she had emerged stronger, ready for the new life that was about to begin. 6 months later, the world had been reborn in hues of green and gold. Spring had arrived, and with it, new life. Leo Hayes was born on a sunny April morning, a healthy, beautiful baby with a tuft of dark hair and his mother's determined eyes. Holding him in her arms for the first time, Nora felt a love so fierce and absolute it eclipsed all the pain that had come before. She had given him her own last name, a declaration of their independence, and a fresh start. Her life was unrecognizable from the one she had lived with Marcus. The divorce had been finalized quickly, with Marcus facing a long prison sentence, signing everything Isabella put in front of him. Nora received a settlement that was not just generous, but just. It restored the family trust money Marcus had pilfered, and provided more than enough for her and Leo to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. But Nora had no interest in a life of idle luxury. With a portion of the settlement and Julian's guidance, she established the Leo Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing legal and financial support to single mothers and victims of domestic abuse. Her past work as a gallery curator gave her the skills to organize fundraisers and build a network of support. Her personal story gave her the empathy and credibility to connect with the women she was helping. She had found her calling, not in spite of her trauma, but because of it. Marcus Sterling was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He lost everything: his company, his fortune, his freedom. Jonathan Price managed to save his firm, rebranding it and implementing stringent new oversight, but the scandal left an indelible stain. Chloe Dubois disappeared from the social scene, moving to the West Coast to start over in obscurity. They were all ghosts from a life that felt a world away. Nora had moved into her own home, a charming brownstone in a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood. It was filled with light, art, and the happy gurgles of her baby boy. It was a home built on strength and love, not on secrets and lies. Her relationship with Julian had blossomed slowly, naturally, like a cautious flower turning toward the sun. He had been her unwavering support through the birth, holding her hand and being the first person after her to hold Leo. He was a constant, gentle presence in their lives. He would come over for dinner, his deep voice reading bedtime stories to Leo, his tech billionaire status melting away to reveal just a man who was kind, funny, and wonderful with a baby. One evening, they were sitting in her garden as the sun set, Leo asleep in his bassinet beside them. "You know," Julian said, his eyes on the sleeping baby, "when Lena died, I thought my life was over. I built walls around myself. I didn't think I'd ever feel this again." He turned to her, his gaze full of a profound emotion that made her heart skip a beat. This peace, this hope. Nora reached out and took his hand. "You saved me, Julian, in so many ways." "No," he said, shaking his head. "We saved each other." He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that wasn't born of drama or tragedy, but of quiet understanding, shared healing, and the promise of a beautiful, sunlit future. It was a kiss that sealed the past and opened the door to a new beginning. At the airport, in the middle of a storm, a cruel man had pushed his pregnant wife to the ground, thinking it was the end of her story. He never could have imagined it was just the beginning of her real life, a life filled with love, purpose, and a happiness he would never know. Nora's incredible journey shows us that even in our darkest moments, when we feel most alone and betrayed, there is a strength within us waiting to be discovered. Her story is a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or status, but in resilience, integrity, and the courage to fight for yourself and for your future. The storm Marcus created was meant to destroy her, but instead it washed away a life built on lies and revealed a path to true happiness and purpose. She found not just a savior in a kind stranger, but the hero within herself. If Nora's story of survival and triumph moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this video with someone who needs to hear a message of hope. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story of karma, justice, and the unbreakable power of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.